I was 13 years old when my grandfather died, and I was the only one in the room when it happened. Not because I had been chosen, not because anyone had decided I was old enough or steady enough to be there at the end. I was there because I had gone in early that morning to bring him water, the way I had been doing every morning for 3 weeks. And I had sat down in the chair beside his bed to wait until he woke. And somewhere between sitting down and the gray winter light coming through the window, I had fallen asleep in the chair. And when I opened my eyes, the room had changed. The kind of change a room gets when something in it has shifted without moving. He was awake. He was looking at the ceiling, and his lips were moving. I leaned forward. I took his hand. His hand was very cold and very light, the way hands get when the body has begun releasing things it no longer needs. I leaned close because the movement of his lips was making almost no sound, and I thought he was praying, which is what the old men in our community did in their final hours. They prayed in the old High German, long passages from memory, the words worn smooth from decades of use like stones in a stream bed. But he was not praying. He turned his head and he looked directly at me. And he said 3 words in Pennsylvania Dutch, low and deliberate, with the particular precision of a man who has chosen these words from everything he might have said and has decided these are the ones that matter. 3 words, and then his eyes went to the ceiling again, and his hand went still in mine, and by the time my grandmother came in from the kitchen, he was gone. I did not tell anyone what he said. Not that morning, not at the funeral, not in the weeks after, when the family gathered and grieved and told stories about him the way Amish families tell stories, carefully, warmly, with the edges smoothed down into something acceptable. I sat in all of those gatherings, and I held those 3 words inside me like a coal from the fire carried in cupped hands, careful not to let the air at it, careful not to let it go out. I held them for 11 years. More than 90% of the people watching right now haven't subscribed yet. And perhaps that wouldn't matter so much if these stories were just words. But they're not. They're pieces of people, pieces of moments that changed families forever. So if you found something of yourself in this channel, please subscribe. It's completely free, and it helps this community keep growing. And while you're here, I want to know, what feeling brought you to this video today? Tell me in the comments below. I need to tell you who he was before I tell you what he said. Because the 3 words are nothing without the man, and the man is nothing without the 60 years that came before that morning. My grandfather's name was Elias Byler. He had been born on the farm where he died, which was not uncommon in our world, and he had farmed it for 55 years, which was also not uncommon, and he had been a deacon in the church for 30 of those years, which was the thing everyone named first when they named him. Deacon Elias. It was how the community held him, in that title, in that office, in the particular gravity that the role conferred on a man in our tradition. A deacon was not a bishop. He did not hold the highest authority. But he held something perhaps more intimate than authority. He held the community's private business. He was the one who visited the homes where something was wrong. He was the one who sat with families before a difficult church decision. He was the one who knew, without being told, where the grief was and where the fault was and what needed to be said, and what needed to be held in silence. He was very good at silence. I say this as one of the highest things I can say about a person. The silence of my grandfather was not the silence of a man with nothing to say. It was the silence of a man who had learned that most things are better carried than spoken, and who carried what he carried with a straightness of back that never let you see the weight. He had 7 children. My mother was the youngest daughter. I was the 4th of her 6 children, and I was, of everyone in the family, the one who had spent the most time sitting beside him. Not because I was his favorite, I do not think Elias Byler permitted himself favorites, but because I was a quiet child who did not need to fill silence. And he noticed this, and occasionally, when I was very young, he would find me in some corner of the farm and simply sit nearby, the 2 of us saying nothing, and it felt like the most natural thing in the world. I think he was preparing me. I did not know that then. I think he had been preparing me for years for the morning he would turn his head and say 3 words to the only person in the room who would understand what to do with them. What I mean is, I do not think it was an accident that I was there. My grandfather had been a deacon for 30 years. He knew how to arrange things without appearing to arrange them. He had something he needed to say. He had chosen who would hear it, and he had chosen carefully. The 3 words he said were these: Sie lebt noch. She is still living. I was 24 years old when I finally told my mother. By then, I had been married 3 years, had 1 child and another coming, and had carried those 3 words through courtship and marriage and the ordinary, enormous business of building a life, turning them over in the quiet moments, in the garden, in the half-dark before the children woke, trying to understand what a dying man had meant to give me with them. Sie lebt noch. She is still living. Who was she? That was the question I had spent 11 years circling. I had built theories and dismissed them. A woman from the community who had been shunned and forgotten. An elderly relative I had never been told about. Someone from his own past, his own long life, whom he had failed in some way and was now, in the final moment, confessing to the one person who had leaned close enough to hear. I had told no one because I did not know what I was holding, and I did not want to put it down until I understood it. My mother was in the kitchen when I told her. She was doing what she was always doing, working, moving, the continuous industry of a woman who had been taught that stillness was a kind of sin. I sat down at her table and I told her that I had been alone with her father when he died, and that he had said something to me, and that I had not told anyone, and that I was telling her now. She went very still. My mother, who was never still, went completely still. I said the 3 words. She stood at the kitchen counter with her back to me for a long time, long enough that I began to understand the 3 words meant something to her, long enough that I began to understand she already knew who she was. She turned around. Her face had done something I had never seen my mother's face do. It had gone inward, the way a room goes dim when a cloud crosses the sun. Everything's still there, but differently lit. She sat down. She said, "How long have you known?" I said, 11 years. I didn't know what I was holding. She looked at her hands, then she told me. Her name was Anna. She had been born the same year as my mother, 1941, which meant she and my mother would have grown up together in the same community, which is exactly what they had done. They had been girls together, school together, church together, harvest seasons and quilting circles, and the long, slow formation of young women inside a world that shapes its daughters very deliberately. They had been close. My mother used the word close and then stopped, and then used a different word. She said, like sisters. Anna had left the community at 19, not shunned. She had left before baptism, which in our tradition was the door that, once walked through, could not be walked back out of without consequence. She had left before the door. She had simply gone. In the way young people sometimes went, in the time before I was born, when the English world was beginning to pull at the edges of everything, she had gone, and the community had grieved it quietly, the way you grieve the loss of something you cannot speak about directly, and time had passed, and her name had stopped being said. My mother had not stopped thinking about her. I understood this without being told explicitly. I understood it from the way my mother's hands lay on the table, from the way she said, like sisters, and then stopped. From the 59 years of not saying a name and what that kind of not saying costs. Here is what I had to ask next, and it took me a moment to find the way into it. I said, Mama, did Großdaddy know where she was? My mother looked at me for a long time. She said, he was a deacon for 30 years. That was the answer. That was the whole answer. My grandfather, Elias Byler, deacon for 30 years, keeper of the community's private business, the man who visited the homes where something was wrong. He had known where Anna was. He had known for decades, I understood now. In his role, he would have been the one who tried to maintain some form of thread between those who left before baptism and those who stayed. Not officially, not in any way the church would have sanctioned or even acknowledged, but quietly, in the way he did everything. He had kept the knowledge of her the way he kept everything he carried, straight-backed, without showing the weight. He had told no one, not even my mother, who had needed to know for 50 years. And then he was dying, and he had found me in the chair beside his bed, and he had turned his head, and he had said the 3 words that were not a prayer and not a confession, but something between the two. She is still living. He was telling me to find her. I knew this with a certainty that I still cannot fully explain. The certainty that comes not from reasoning, but from having sat beside a man in silence long enough to know the shape of what he meant without the words. He was telling me. He was releasing the weight he had carried and placing it in the only hands that had been there to receive it. Mine. Because I was quiet. Because I did not flinch from silence. Because he had for years been preparing me without telling me what he was preparing me for. After my mother told me about Anna, I went home and I sat in my own kitchen in the dark for a long time. I thought about a man who had known something for decades and had not said it, had kept the knowledge sealed inside the office of his discretion, inside the gravity of his role, and had finally, in the last moment available to him, chosen to speak. I thought about what it costs a person to keep a secret for that long, and what it costs the people who needed the secret and didn't have it. I thought about my mother saying, like sisters, and then stopping. He had been protecting the community. That was the charitable reading, the one I kept returning to and kept finding insufficient. A deacon protected what needed protecting. Anna had made her choice before baptism. The community had a way of handling these things, a sealed way, a way of not speaking the name until the name faded, and he had been its instrument. But he had also been my grandmother's husband and my mother's father, and he had watched my mother carry an unnamed grief for 50 years while holding the address of the person my mother was grieving. I do not know how to hold both of those things cleanly. I am 84 years old, and I still do not know. But I have learned that you do not always need to resolve a thing in order to carry it forward. I found Anna in the spring of the following year, not through any great effort of investigation, through the particular grace that finds you sometimes when you have been carrying something long enough. A woman from our district who had married English and lived 2 towns over knew a woman who had worked in a shop beside a woman who had mentioned, once, a name. The name reached me through 3 sets of hands, the way things travel in communities that are small enough to have memory, even when the memory is unofficial and untraceable. Anna was living 60 miles away. She was in her 60s by then. She had never married. She had made a life, a job, an apartment, English friends, the ordinary texture of an English life built from scratch by a woman who had started with nothing at 19 and had spent 50 years becoming herself in a world that had not made her. I wrote her a letter. This took me longer than finding her had taken. Because what do you write? I am the granddaughter of the deacon who knew where you were. I am the child who was in the room when he died and who has been holding 3 words for 11 years, and I think they were meant for you as much as for me. I am my mother's daughter, and my mother said you were like sisters, and stopped. I wrote it and rewrote it and finally sent the shortest version. 3 sentences: my name, my grandfather's name, and the 3 words he had said. She wrote back in 2 weeks. Her letter was 4 pages long. I will not tell you everything in it because some of it is hers and not mine to give. But I will tell you what she said about my grandfather because it is what changed everything I thought I understood about the man. She said he had written to her once a year, every year, from the year she left until the year he died. Not long letters. She described them as brief, careful, the letters of a man writing in a language he was not fully certain he was permitted to use. He wrote to tell her that her family was well. He wrote to say that her mother, who died in 1978, had spoken of her in her final weeks. He wrote to say that the community had changed, slowly, in the way communities change, that some of what she had been unable to bear was less sharp now. He wrote once to say that her friend, he used the word friend, careful deacon that he was, not wanting to say what he knew, her friend still thought of her. Did not say my mother's name, did not say like sisters, just her friend still thought of her. He had never told my mother he was writing. He had never told Anna that my mother did not know. He had maintained for 50 years a single thin thread between a woman who had left and the world she had left, without asking either side's permission, without telling either side the other was being held in view, without ever resolving the tension or closing the gap or doing anything so definitive as bringing them together. He had just kept the thread. In his quiet, straight-backed, weight-bearing way, kept the thread and said nothing, and died with it in his hands, and put those 3 words in mine because the thread had to go somewhere when he was done with it. I have thought about this man for 60 years. My whole life I have been thinking about him. And what I understand now, at 84, that I could not have understood at 13 or 24 or even 40, is this. He was not a simple person doing a simple thing. He was a person in an impossible position, inside a tradition that required sealed silences, holding a knowledge that wanted to be spoken, maintaining a role that demanded discretion, while carrying a human reality that demanded connection. And he had done the only thing a man like him, in a world like his, could do. He had found the smallest possible opening, and he had maintained it. 1 letter a year. Nothing that could be named or sanctioned or punished. Just the thinnest thread of, I know you exist, and I am not going to pretend otherwise. My mother met Anna in the October of that year. I drove them both, my mother in her good dress, her hands in her lap the way she held them when she was trying not to show something, to a coffee shop in a town neither of them had history in, neutral ground, English ground. I sat in the car and waited. They were inside for 2 hours and 40 minutes. When my mother came back out, she had been crying, and she looked 20 years younger, which I did not think was possible. And she got into the car and sat down and looked at her hands and said nothing for a long time. Then she said, "He should have told me years ago." I said, "Yes." She said, "But he kept her. He kept the thread." I said, "Yes." She was quiet for another long time. The October light did what October light does, went gold and long through the window. Then she said, "I don't know whether to be angry with him or grateful." I said, "I think you might be allowed to be both." She looked at me then, really looked at me, the way she had not looked at me since I said the 3 words at her kitchen table. And she said, quietly, more to herself than to me, "He chose you. He could have told any of them. He chose the one who would wait long enough to understand." I have turned that over for 30 years. The idea that my grandfather, dying in the gray January light, had known what he was doing when he turned his head and found my eyes, had known I would hold it, had known I would not speak until I understood what I was holding, had known somehow that the thread needed to pass through 11 years of silence before it was ready to become something else. I am 84. I do not know if that is wisdom or burden. Most things that matter are both. What I know is this: the 3 words he said were not an ending. They were an instruction. She is still living. Go, therefore, find her, carry the thread forward. Do not let what I kept die with me. I carried it My mother carried it for the years she had left after that October afternoon. And Anna, who had spent 50 years building herself in a world that had not made her, who had received one careful letter a year from a deacon who could not say what he meant, but would not say nothing, Anna carried it too. We all carry what the ones before us could not put down. The threads they maintained in silence, the knowledge they sealed inside their discretion, the words they finally said when there was almost no time left to say them. We carry it forward into the daylight they could not reach. We say the names they could not say. We close, slowly, imperfectly, the distances they spent their lives secretly refusing to accept as final. That is what I believe my grandfather was. Not a man who made the right choice, not a man who made the wrong one, a man who made the only choice his world gave him room for, and who held it with everything he had, and who in the last moment found one child in a chair and put the thread in her hands and trusted her to know what it was for. I knew what it was for. I am still carrying it. If this story moved you, if it reminded you of someone, somewhere, or some thread you have been holding without knowing what to do with it, tell me in the comments. Tell me your story if you are ready, or just tell me you are listening. Before you go, I want to say, more than 90% of the people who watch these videos still haven't subscribed. So if something in this story touched you, if it stayed with you, if it reminded you of a name that hasn't been said in too long, I hope you'll subscribe. It's free, and it helps these stories continue reaching the people who need them. And before you leave, tell me, what part of this stayed with you longest? I would love to read your thoughts below. All scripts are fully human-researched, human-written, and human-edited. This channel uses an AI avatar and AI voice solely for storytelling and identity protection. Stories are inspired by real Amish experiences. Names, places, and details have been changed for privacy. Here are the key craft notes. The hook is the 3 words themselves, withheld for the entire first section. Sie lebt noch. She is still living. The viewer cannot leave because they don't have them yet. The twist is double-layered. First, Elias knew where Anna was. Second, and harder, he had been writing to her for 50 years while never telling Rebecca's mother, his own daughter, who spent those same 50 years grieving. He kept the thread without closing the distance. The CTA placement, CTA 1, lands right after the hook is fully set, but before the secret is revealed, exactly where emotional investment peaks. CTA 2 uses the style you provided, with the community/subscription language blended into the emotional close. What makes this 100% unique from the previous scripts, the central figure is not a husband or mother-in-law, but a grandfather. And the haunting is not about marriage or control, but about a man's impossible loyalty to 2 silences at once, institutional and personal, and the single thread he maintained between them for 50 years without asking permission from either side. The closing line, "I am still carrying it," is the quietest possible ending and the truest one for Rebecca's voice.